If something isn't worthy of having a conversation around, then why would you even publish it? Why would you like? Why is that worthy of spending time on? Because it's what discourse is what moves the needle. Our entire goal is like, how do we use our own tech to make us and our customers' motion more human? Which is like the funny part of it, right? The AI just makes us more human, really, and that's the goal. The idea that you can just automate everything and it's going to work is so like not realistic, because it's what you just said. It's everything becomes commoditized.
Welcome to AI Marketing Pioneers, where we bring you insights from the leading minds in AI marketing. Today, we're exploring how the best marketers are turning AI from a novelty into real competitive advantage. Today, we're joined by Melissa Rosenthal, co-founder of OutLever and one of the most recognizable names in modern marketing, honestly, from one of BuzzFeed's earliest employees, where she built their iconic branded content business, to CRO at Cheddar, CCO at ClickUp, and now pioneering a new category called account-based media. Melissa has spent her career at the intersection of brand, media, and growth. At OutLever right now, she's transforming how B2B and B2C brands generate demand, not by handing them another SaaS tool, but by turning them into the #1 news source in their industry through a tech-enabled service model, unlike anything else on the market. Today, we're breaking down why AI adoption in marketing is slower than the headline suggests, why brand building matters more than ever in a world of commoditized automation, and what it actually looks like to build a new go-to-market category from scratch. I'm personally super excited to sit down with Melissa today. I'm sure all of you will enjoy the conversation. So let's dive in. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me and for the very nice intro.
Of course. So before we get started, well, first of all, your career path is just incredible. From, like I said, being one of BuzzFeed's earliest employees to your time as CCO at ClickUp, and now pioneering a new category at OutLever. Can you maybe just walk us through your journey itself and share any key lesson from those high growth environments that still guide your work today?
Yeah, I mean, my entire career has really like shaped each, I would say every path that I've taken, every next role. But the fundamentals are actually still very much like etched in what I learned at BuzzFeed. And what I learned there was, we were pioneering how content goes viral, what resonates emotionally, what people connect with, and why. And I think like those core fundamentals and principles are still incredibly relevant today. I carry that through every part of my work, but really understanding why people share content, why they engage with it, psychologically, like what parts of their brains are triggered when they're reading certain pieces and what that means, can really just be, the application of that is across everything. So I've taken that with me everywhere I've gone. At Cheddar, we built a new type of live streaming media news network on the back of the fact that we knew that the method of distribution and viewership was changing and would continue to change. And, that has also shaped my view in the way that I think about modern day distribution. And at ClickUp, we were building a very, a SaaS product in a hyper competitive market and working across effectively every single vertical, industry agnostic from teams of 1 to thousands. And then, incorporating, every role on top of that, that's a hard job marketing that. And just like what we did there, how we built that, how much brand mattered. And then also the challenges of like that role, all of that, all of those experiences uniquely have both independently and also collectively shaped the way that I view modern marketing and why we're building what we are at OutLever.
That's awesome. The thing that's fascinating to me is the actual psychology of audience and how readers actually care about specific segments of your content versus maybe one generic messaging. From your experience back at BuzzFeed or even Cheddar or ClickUp as well, was there any sort of interesting approach or framework that you used in identifying what actually resonates and what doesn't? Were you running like ton of A/B tests, I guess, or were you doing
Oh yeah.
any other interesting tactics?
Yeah, I mean, like on at ClickUp, A/B testing was an enormous part of our model of, product-led growth and understanding what drives people further down the funnel, right? But then on the BuzzFeed side of it, we were testing like thousands and thousands of templates and prompts in on an AI sense, but prompts of what resonates with people more, and we were testing those against each other and effectively creating these like frameworks of how people relate to specific types of templates of content of emotionally resonant content. We would tag everything. I mean, the systems that we built there, fundamentally, like again, have shaped every piece and layer of like how I understand why people share, even if the type of content is different, right? Like we're not, that wasn't talking about enterprise AI, but it was certainly relevant to the way that people either want to see themselves in content, they want to see someone they know in the content, they resonate with it because it is humorous or it touches an emotional layer of something that's happening within their ecosystem right now. It is educational. There's certain reasons why something performs, and it performs within different audiences for different reasons. And understanding that in almost like a mathematical, like scientific way was kind of the basis of BuzzFeed to begin with, right? Like it was, can we routinely understand virality in a predictable sense? Now, in enterprise marketing, like virality isn't really the goal, but the reality of it is, how do you create virality to begin with? And how virality starts is discourse. And, I think, how do you allow people to have an opinion and, you know, allowing them to speak and give their perspective on something is really like what shaped my modern view of that is the most important metric like any marketer should try to optimize for, which is the conversation. Like if something isn't worthy of having a conversation around, then why would you even publish it? Why would you like why is that worthy of spending time on? Because it's what discourse is what moves the needle. And that definitely started with like, how do we get people interested enough to share their opinion on a piece of content?
That's awesome. Um, and maybe zooming into your time at ClickUp as well, one thing that stood out to me was the amazing integrated 360 campaign that you ran back then. You invested across every channel, including paid, SEO, organic, billboards, and even a Super Bowl ad. And I was wondering, what did that experience actually teach you about what builds compounding demand or
Hmm.
even
Yeah.
brand awareness in today's marketing landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is like twofold, right? ClickUp has much more of a B2C model in the sense that, yeah, they're selling enterprise deals, but the majority was selling to individuals, teams of 2, teams of 5, teams of 10 across every single vertical, right? Every single industry. So when you're thinking about the TAM of that market, it operates much more like a consumer brand, especially when you're thinking about how to market it, than it does like a true enterprise B2B. So the approach there was, well, if we want to really allow ourselves to gain the market share that we need to compete with like an Atlassian or a Jira or an Asana, we need to operate like a modern consumer brand with marketing. So how do we, again, the emotional side of branding, like how do we tap into that? And then also, how do we use all of the channels available to be able to create this, what you just mentioned, like 360 approach to marketing? Because I think if you're able to, like, if you have the dollars to spend and you have the ability to activate all of these channels, which is, a very, it's a nice lever to be able to pull, then what do you pull in from the brand side that allows this message to resonate across all of those channels once you activate them, right? It's two sides of the coin. It's like, okay, we have to do this because we're closer to a consumer brand in the way that we need to market. we have the ability to activate these channels. How do we get in front of the right people at the right time? And what is the message that's going to resonate through each of those channels? And also, how do we connect to them emotionally so that we are constantly top of mind? That's the key, right? We make marketing so complicated sometimes, but the reality of it is you need to be top of mind with the right people all of the time. Because if they're not in the buying cycle, the minute that someone else talks about you, or they are, you need to be the first thing that they think of, right? Like that's really what you're trying to get to. So, that definitely shaped my view of like, how do we think about like what is the way that we make these connections? How do we activate on the right channels? And like, what is the story that we're able to tell? And that's really kind of how we thought about it.
Oh, that's amazing. And now comes the interesting part. So today's like media narrative right now is like AI is just transforming marketing overnight. Period. Like when you read through any article these days, everyone's like, "Oh, AI is just fundamentally changing how marketing is done," and yada yada. But you've also noted the actual pace of adoption inside marketing teams is actually much slower, and also, based on your previous experience in really sort of grounding the marketing messaging and the actual campaign creation and strategy off of the audience psychology and actually making the connection, um, I think there's I think there's a little bit of a disconnect that's beginning to sort of develop with the media narrative with AI
Hmm.
and how marketing is actually done today and what actually still works. So, what's the biggest disconnect you're seeing on your end, and what's really happening on the ground right now?
So there's a couple things at play. One is that like marketing, what worked in marketing 5 years ago doesn't work today anymore. Everything is too saturated. The channels are too saturated. Increasingly becoming more saturated with AI, which is an increased problem, right? And the modern go-to-market just needs to be different. Like it can't work on the playbooks that worked, I don't know, even a year ago. Honestly, like things are changing so quickly. At the same time, there is like what you mentioned, this narrative of like AI adoption being like so fast and so furious and it's changing everything. But the reality is it's really not. Like teams with inside organizations, especially larger organizations on the marketing side, are insanely siloed, which means that if there's an AI tool being used, it's not really being used across the entire marketing stack. It's being used maybe in one area, maybe, but the adoption on that is still very low. Like there's not one person typically across marketing like who's in charge of driving that adoption, so you see like tools being used in fragmented ways. It's the same thing that happened with SaaS like years ago, where there was an onslaught of SaaS tools and everyone was adopting everything, and internally like the SaaS bill was enormous because there were a million tools being used. Like that's kind of what's happening here. When they onboard a tool, there's not like again one person trying to drive the adoption of it. So like we see this happening, which means that adoption is just slower. It's not being adopted across the entire marketing team. There are like obviously like IT layers of AI that are being implemented at faster paces. I would say like on the data side, it's a little bit different. Marketing is like its own beast. Marketing is, to me, the slowest adopter of AI across the entire enterprise, both on like the cybersecurity, the data, the orchestration side. So what does that mean? That means that like the go-to-market doesn't work anymore. B, AI is slower to be adopted. So what is happening? So why, like we're finding interesting success with two pieces of that. One, I find this so funny because Sequoia just came out with like an article yesterday. Someone at Sequoia penned an article about like why tech-enabled services is the new gold. And what does that mean? It's like it's the reality that like we can't do the same thing with AI tools that we did with SaaS tools because the adoption is likely slower, and that to get full buy-in and more dollars per customer, the tech that you're enabled with is actually going to service and allow them to adopt it a lot faster. So like that was just penned yesterday, and I'm finding myself saying, yeah, like that's actually I think a big lever, which is using companies that are tech enabled, because just the adoption internally and being like fed a tool and expecting like there to be like immediate adoption of that is just not it's not reality. It's never really been reality. It's really tough. Like it's really tough to, especially like expansion of adoption internally. Like that's always been a hard thing. Second piece is that whole go to market, which is like everything is changing so quickly that we believe the optimization needs to be for the most human parts of it, but they need to be tech enabled, which is like sort of this perfect, I think, marriage of AI and like the human perspective, which is what we are focused on and optimizing for. How do we build real relationships with your buyers, with your subject matter experts in your area that allow you to have like true category authority? But what allows us to do that are AI tools that we've built mixed with people. So our best metric is like, how do we make our team so efficient, like the most efficient and fast and productive team within the tools that are made for building what we're building into a machine. And that's what we found as sort of that perfect combination. So I bring it back to like what you first said. It's the breakdown of the traditional go to market in a way that needs to be re-energized and reimagined. And the second part of that is the fact that the adoption of the tools that are, just simply like products without service attached is really hard. How do you combine those two things? How do you think about modernizing marketing in a way that separates it from all of the AI content and stuff that's being generated? And then also, how do you enable and empower people to be able to do that? And it's through, I think, tech-enabled services. And that's sort of how we think about the whole thing. Just try to tie it back to, all of that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and that's actually one thing we see from a lot of our customers as well, like around digital adoption across the organization, and also a lot more of the service aspect that's really needed for
Mm-hmm.
these AI products to actually work really well within the existing workflow. So that's really fascinating. In terms of the actual GTM approach and how you're leveraging AI tools and all the different technologies within your existing team workflows. How are you currently thinking about it? I think you also had a lot of interesting insights around like what a an AI enabled, AI native GTM should look like in today's world. I'd be just curious to hear a little bit more about how it currently works within your team right now and how you're actually envisioning it to continue to evolve.
Yeah, good question. So what we found is that, and why we've had to build like all of these tools ourselves, and like why we became this tech enabled company that we are right now, is simply because when everything doesn't talk to each other, like all of the different pieces don't talk to each other, it doesn't work. It falls apart. From like outreach messaging to CRM to inbox to training journalists off of the same mindset and framework that the interviews have been done before, to creating templatized ways of thinking and decision trees and reporting. If those things aren't all talking to each other, it like the whole thing breaks. And I think that's why we're finding that within companies, it's really hard because all these companies are using different tools, they're using different things, X, Y, and Z. And to get those things to all like work together, talk to each other, and then to bring in new AI tools, it's really challenging. So we had to rebuild kind of like the infrastructure of what we knew we needed to be able to service our customers, where it all spoke to itself. And like we're still obviously in the process of scaling that and building that. But for instance, we had to rebuild like Fireflies or Otter. And our version of that is trained off of now thousands of our own interviews that we've done with ICPs and subject matter experts across, thousands of companies. And what we do is we insert our journalists, let's just say, into one of these interviews. Our version of Fireflies, we call it OutLever. Oliver rides along, and Oliver, is thinking like a journalist and is trained off of thousands of interviews. So Oliver already knows like what you should be asking, how to divert the conversation, how to steer the conversation, how it's another brain. It's like how it should be thinking about what's happening during that conversation and steering it in certain directions, empowering our journalist on the other side to ask better questions, to steer that person in the different direction, to come up with a really amazing piece. And then Oliver takes all of that data And Oliver frames it into, okay, here's like based on thousands of interviews conducted, based on this industry, this persona, this is how we should imagine what a first draft would be. And then we do use human touch from there to help bring that to like last touch, what we call it. So it's using AI in a very like, how do we create this into a predictable machine? But human touch is really important. How do we make sure that it stays within the rails and that there's a person on the other side guiding it? That's just one example. And then how do we take that and we put it into an editing tool where everyone that needs to edit it and see it in real time has access to edit it? Then we have to ship it over to our images team. It has to become a machine. And all of that is created using, models, our own proprietary models based on things that we've, the data that we've created, but then also Claude and other tools.
Oh, that's super interesting. I like how you actually came up with these personas to actually help you with the different stages of their workflow there. Um, I want to hear a little bit more about your work at OutLever. Definitely, I think the one thing that really stood out to me during our initial conversation was the concept of account-based media, which is effectively turning brands into the number one news source in their industry. I mean, that's fascinating, and I think that totally makes sense from the actual concept standpoint. But it's a fundamentally different go-to-market approach, especially in today's age
Yeah.
where like people just continue to churn out content with database optimization. Um, how did you arrive at that model itself, and how do you currently operate to actually go through that experience and helping brands become the number one news source? If you can maybe just do a quick sort of an overview for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So my time at BuzzFeed and Cheddar certainly like informed a lot of what I believe has driven my view on what modern media looks like and what it can look like. At Cheddar specifically, B2B companies were spending a lot of money with us to advertise and to, like borrow the credibility and authority that we had as a news source. And, during that time, things are going well for media. You don't question it. It's all good. But I always wondered, like, why don't they spend a little bit of this money, a little bit of this budget in investing in their own ability to own this over time, where that investment would compound rather than die when the flight of advertising dollars is over. Similar to like just paid ads in general, right? They don't. There's no life. There's no like there's no like shelf life to that. It just dies. So my thought there was, valid, but not really the right time. And then flash forward, running Market ClickUp and seeing all the challenges and opportunities within being able to own narratives and building that. And like, it was hard for us because we just wanted to reach so many different people. As you go up market, you face different challenges. And kind of after that part of my career, I was like, oh, media is not what it was anymore. Current media companies can't really afford to exist with the advertising model, which presents itself this really interesting landscape because a lot of them are shutting down. They can't really afford to pay their journalists. They're not getting the traffic they once did because they're not, the eyeballs are shifting into different places and distribution has changed. And the modern media empire is collapsing. What that does is it opens up this really cool opportunity for companies to come in and actually own that space because one, they don't really have the competition, and two, they don't need the advertising dollars to exist. So if they're monetized in a different way through owning relationships, owning authority, which is what they're spending money on anyway, the thought was like, why aren't they doing this? This is a huge opportunity. So we come in and we effectively allow them to build their own, media trade publications that almost becomes an ecosystem of how that company operates. They're allowed to own the authority and credibility in their industry that a blog just doesn't allow them to. They're able to have conversations with the right people, their ICPs, their current customers, giving a megaphone and a platform to everyone that matters in their space on their behalf, creating a share network of distribution on LinkedIn where it actually really matters, and getting the right people to view that content and the right people to share it and the right people to talk about it. And thinking about just like how that compounds over time. If you're consistently doing that and you're building trust every single day because you have to earn it every day, you're going to do really well in the future if like that's your model, because there's nothing about that doesn't keep growing. So the view is really that, how do we create something that over time compounds and has exponential ways to grow. With some of our customers, we're turning these into dinners and real life events and magazines and physical publications, because they've now gotten their buyer hooked and they've built the trust and they've built the credibility, and there's only up from there. So it's just reimagining, like in today's market where it's harder to get attention, it's harder to build audience, trust is fleeting, and it's harder to build relationships. Like, how do we optimize for something where that's the entire goal? So that's how we think about it.
No, I love it. That's actually in line with how we've been thinking about the sort of transformation of marketing and what's going to be more important in this new age of AI,
Hmm.
and when everything's just so prevalent. Um, but it's amazing how you actually
Yeah.
continue to sort of set that up for different
And
customers, and yeah, that's
yeah,
actually
just one more
amplified.
thing is, I'll
Mhm.
just say, like, what our entire goal is, like, how do we use our own tech to make
Mhm.
us and our customers' motion more human? Which is like the
Mm,
funny part of it, right? It's like the AI just makes us more human, really, and that's the goal. Which is an interesting, maybe contrarian view of like what everyone else is saying. It's like, we'll just have agents do it. I don't really believe in that. So I'm saying, can our agents make us more empowered to do the more human thing? That's the
mhm.
reality.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Maybe speaking of AI, specifically from this perspective, um, I mean, you and I also discussed this earlier, but really the proliferation in AI and content generation, whether it's a text, image, or even video, it's really making the average content consumption to be almost like a fully commoditized experience in many ways.
Hmm.
Like everything you read on Google these days, probably maybe more than 70% of those articles are written by AI to some extent.
Yeah.
Um, Probably more than 80% of what you read on LinkedIn or X are also AI generated these days.
Mhm.
And like in this world, like one big question I keep coming back to is, how do we as marketers really stand out in this world in a way where you are still embracing AI, but also at the same time still, coming up with the distinct human voices or human taste in everything we do, which I think is going to be ever more important over the next 3 to 5 years. But I'm curious, like how do you view the landscape right now, especially when it comes to AI and content generation and content production, and where human AI sort of balance can play out in the most human way for marketers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is that, like, can you find that perfect, like, marriage and inflection point of where you can insert people where the AI helps, right? It helps on all levels of like productivity, connection, connectivity, understanding, psychology in some capacities of like knowing the right time to do the right things and connecting the right things so that people can do their best work. I think like when you find that perfect like marriage of what that looks like that's where we're going to shine, especially in marketing. Like the idea that you can just automate everything and it's going to work is so like not realistic, because it's what you just said. It's everything becomes commoditized. And then all of a sudden, like all of that content is then trained off of new AI content. And then you just have like dead internet, right? Like nothing is anything anymore because it's all just like garbage. So, I mean, I think like people are probably like the narrative is weird because the narrative is just like, we're going to automate everything and cut all these jobs. And I think like within engineering and building, like it is changing everything much faster than it is in marketing. And I think marketing is still the one skill set that is kind of differentiated. Like it can help connect the dots, it can create campaigns, it can write briefs, it can do certain things, sure, like 100%. And I think like using AI to optimize the productivity of marketers in every way possible so that they can do their best work is where it should be. Like automating it all doesn't really work, or it does until it doesn't, and then everyone freaks out because it doesn't. I think there's like always this narrative, also the narrative of like what the VC narrative versus like the actual narrative, or the market narrative versus like what's actually happening is very different story once you're embedded into an enterprise and you see it 100 times. Like it's not reality.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And for the enterprise customer that you talk to, um, where do you see as the sort of biggest blockers or challenges in really like just adopting more AI products in everything they do? Is it more of maybe inertia from bigger organizations, or is it like compliance issues, or is it something else? Like what do you see as the biggest blocker and challenges?
I would say like mostly I don't know. It's like it definitely is like inertia within the organization to some degree. Like again, like everything is really siloed. Like which I just thought it would be closer together. Like things would be closer together. Like demand gen and thought leadership and customer marketing and the blog. Like everything is like separate, and it lives in like separate orgs and worlds. So like while one team, again, like what I said, like one team might be adopting a little bit of it, like it's definitely not across the whole marketing team, and they wouldn't even have any idea how to do that because again everything is so siloed. I think that's what shocked me the most. Like I just thought things were closer together, which would allow it, if every team was working in beautiful harmony, like you bring a tool in and you all understand the pieces of how you use that tool and you work on it together. But if one tool is adopting AI, like maybe others pick it up, but it's slow. It's not, there's also like no top down pressure to do it. Like there is and there's not. Like, I'm sure marketers get like CMOs get the pressure all the time. How are you automating this? How are you doing this? How are you doing this? And it's like, oh, our teams are using Descript to like cut up clips, like, or we're using this to do this, but it's so small in the grand scheme of like what it actually means to be like an AI enabled marketing team. And then on top of that, like you still need a unique perspective of like what you adopt and why, and what you don't adopt and why, and where the people still surround those tools, right? Like it needs to be one of the folks at Writer made like an orchestration chart of like, and it's really like reimagining like roles and responsibilities around like where this sits. And I don't think we're there yet. Like that's a very tall ask to like start reimagining the entire organization of a marketing department around the tools that you're choosing to adopt, right? So I think it kind of needs to, like, if we're looking for true adoption at that level, like it would need to be a pretty large reimagining of like what modern marketing is, which I think like there are teams doing that for sure. Um, and I think there are ways to again increase productivity, but I think that's what they're struggling with. And like that's where it's that maybe 3 to 5 year adoption period first, like, oh, we've seen this in X, Y, and Z. Like again, engineering totally different. Marketing is different than engineering, and it's a different adoption cycle.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One interesting question that I always come back to these days, based on my chats with different CMOs and the leaders of the organization these days, is how would you even redesign your marketing organization if you were to start from scratch again today with all the technologies and everything that's available out there? And it's actually one thing we've been asking ourselves at Niche Labs quite a lot. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
of course, like as a company that's building AI agents for marketers, role by role, that totally makes sense. But also as a team, we're a small team, but we deploy more than 20 AI agents helping us across different workflows, mostly within engineering, but also we're beginning to see more use cases within marketing as well. Um, but the big question I've been ask myself and my CMO friends out there today is how would you actually design your organization from scratch with everything that's available out there? So I was actually thinking it would be interesting to ask you if you were to actually design maybe let's say ClickUp's marketing organization from scratch with everything that's available right now. What do you think will be the ideal structure? What still has to be there from human operator standpoint, and what can be handled by AI agents? And like, how does that model actually work?
That's a great question. I think if I was thinking about this, which I'm really not in that headspace, which I kind of am because we're doing this within organizations, but um, I would say definitely thinking about the things that AI cannot replicate, right?
Mhm.
Like, who are our best storytellers and can we make them faster with AI? And like, I would lean into like what's human first, actually. Like, there's like we need someone that kind of connects the tissue between the products and the people in the process too. Like I think that's kind of a must and a mandatory role. But I think the majority of it is, what is it even like? What is modern day marketing? Like, what does demand gen mean? What does ABM mean? What does SEO and content mean? And I would try to get a better definition of each one of those roles into what it actually means today, because we like to say things, but like the actual action of those things is vastly different and changes very fast. And I would break down what those roles actually do. And then I would think about the tools that we could perhaps procure to enable the people that we would hire to move faster on those roles and build around that. So I think, it's not the perfect answer because it's a pretty complicated question, but I think it's mostly what can we not, like, what will differentiate us in the future, right? Like where I don't want to just do the same things. Like everyone else is doing these things. Like we don't want to do the same things as everyone else. How do we think differently? How do we hire roles that allow us to think differently and operate differently? And then what are the tools that will empower us to do that? That's how I would approach it. Less like, well, we need demand gen, we need this, we need that. Like, what does that even mean? Like everyone
Mhm.
has a different definition of it. When I'm looking into like different organizations, they consider it completely different things in the terms of like, well, demand gen here means this and this, and demand gen here means this and this. So like it needs to be, what does that actually mean? What differentiates us in the long term? Where do we want to play, and what enables us to move fast? That's how I think about it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. That's the fun part of these episodes that we're running, because we're also hearing a lot from different leaders from this space, like a bunch of really interesting insights around how things are evolving. But it's just fascinating to think. Like I like it. I like how you're approaching it, which is really asking the core question of what does it even mean in the first place?
Hmm.
Like, because you can't
Yeah,
really
it's
sort of
yeah, and it's time to like, we're at a point in time where it's very fair to like re-ask ourselves that question, right? And like also, I think everything is like, what is the outcome? And I think like outcome based purchases, outcome based decisions of organization is like a really fair way of thinking about like who you hire and where you put them and what you buy and like what you procure. Like, what are the outcomes we want to have and how do we get there? Like, I would start there too. um I think the only thing that matters is outcome. It's not work anymore. Like, it's not work for the sake of work. The efficiency stuff is, being questioned at every organization at every level, and it's like, well, what do we want to do and how do we get there? How do we get there faster, more efficiently? So I think that's a good place to start too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Another fun question. What do you think marketing would actually look like in the next 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. Well, let's say maybe three years, 5 years.
I think, okay, I don't know, like, I think human things will win. Every company that has a better perspective, a stronger perspective, a more differentiated perspective, and feels more human will win. Again, like you need to stand out. That's very important. I think from an organizational level, I think like interesting things will happen. I'm betting that the use of like a ton of different tools doesn't really happen anymore. I think that needs to stop, and like it's not going to work like long term. So I think a lot of companies will gravitate towards, I think, tech enabled services businesses mostly, where there's a mix of like they use a few of those and they use a few tools and they operate around those and they build ecosystems around that. And I think that the idea of the expectation of people going in and using a UI is going to slowly die, because it really doesn't make sense anymore. Like UI in the age of a single stream and a single chat is an outdated way of thinking about things. And I think that the idea that someone has to log into something or do this or do that, and all these teams have to go into different places to get things done, doesn't really make sense. So when I think about it like a very high level, I would say the unification around a single place where things get done. Like, I think that's like, obviously I believe in ClickUp for that reason, but I think within like the actual go to market function, I think that's going to happen for sure. And what that looks like. I think I have a perspective on it. I don't know. Hopefully we're trying to build in that direction. But I think the unification of like where things happen across marketing is going to happen even more. Teams will become less siloed. It'll be how do teams of fewer do more that will be asked. Like, how do we cut our marketing team in half and do a lot of really great work? And I think that that's going to happen. And it's going to be around, we don't need, like, if we can remove the blockers, like, can we get faster? Can we get more efficient? And can we do better work? So I think all of those things in some capacity will be the future of the modern marketing stack, right? Small teams that are able to punch up, do big things, that are enabled by both tech-enabled services and a few tools that they use, and the ability to create the best work and the most differentiated work based on those models and in the fastest amount of time, and ship and send and constantly have a narrative. I would say that's probably, I'll bet the future will shape out somewhere there.
Oh, love it. And now maybe for a marketing leader listening right now to this episode who wants to maybe rethink their go-to-market and maybe embrace a more future-proof strategy, where is the single most important place for them to start?
Building on the things that will compound, like building narratives that will compound, like what allows you to have more ownership of your market tomorrow, like than it did yesterday. Like paid ads are just, there's just no way that like that's going to continually to be like an efficient way of spending money. I think see teams like, all the time saying like our ad spend gets less efficient, our PR strategy is not working, our SEO strategy is not working, right? So I think it's like building for the future and building real relationships, building real authoritative trust. What that looks like is, having real conversations and utilizing real people with real perspectives as channels, and having those conversations very loudly. Like human to human is the way, like for sure. So how do you get there? That's like, I would, if I wasn't like, CMO of a company right now, I'd come to my team and I'd be like, this is the future. We have to optimize for real human relationships and building those and building trust, because what comes with trust is referrals, that comes with closed door meetings, it comes with DMs, it comes with Slack threads, it comes with emails. That's what it is. You're building for the things that you can't see, and like that is the most powerful engine. So how do we build for that? That's entirely what I would shape my entire marketing strategy around.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Um, Maybe like I know we're almost at time right now. Maybe the one last question I would ask is now for anybody within marketing, not necessarily the leaders being in charge of redesigning or reimagining how marketing is working, but for any marketers listening to the show, maybe thinking about like where their jobs are actually going and what they should be really focused on with all the noise around AI and the changes. What's maybe the single best advice that you would give to them? Like, what should they be thinking about? What should they be maybe learning about to really, thrive in this new era?
I think the interesting thing about tech-enabled services is that it also applies to tech-enabled employees, meaning can you make yourself almost your own service as like a tech-enabled service, where that framework of thinking is what are the tools that you would put in place to make you the best at what you do, and what is your operation system within your own like individual pod versus like your team, right? So that when you come to the table within an organization, you almost look like a mini tech-enabled service yourself. Oh, I use this to do this, to do this, to do this, and this is how my framework of thinking is. And when you apply me to your overall marketing framework, here are the outcomes that you get. I would literally position myself as a service within an organization versus an employee. I think that's like the future of how people need to operate, like their own mini operating systems.
That's awesome. Tech-enabled employee. I love that. It's the first time hearing that, but it totally makes sense. I think it's the right way to think about it. It's not really about you becoming a single employee, but it's just more about it. Yeah.
I used to, like, everyone used to ask me, like, they're like, well, how did you get your job at BuzzFeed? And how did this all start? And how did you do the thing that you do? And like, why were you hired? And all this stuff. And the reality was, I got hired as an intern at BuzzFeed because I was working 24/7 on BuzzFeed. When I wasn't in school, when I wasn't working, I was spending 24/7 on that site doing the best work that I could and trying to compete with the editors at BuzzFeed for virality and for the tech and for like the most prestigious awards. And I was just a member of the community doing this. So when I tried to get an internship, yeah, of course I was the top of the pile because I was doing the work already that I would be doing. And when people always ask me that, like, oh, I want to get a marketing job, I want to do this, I'm like, you should already be doing the thing that you want to be doing internally at that company in a really unique way so that when they're looking at you, they're like, well, obviously we'd want to bring this person in. We know their perspective. We know how they use brand. We know the results that we're going to get if we apply this framework of thinking to our organization. And this is just the same thing, extrapolated like, a couple years out for the timeline that we're in now around AI. It's the same framework of thinking and the same reason why you'd get hired today or you'd be an asset today.
That's awesome. Well, Melissa, this was a fantastic show. I loved all the insights and the advice that you shared. I'm sure our listeners really enjoyed that as well. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today. That's it for today's show. If you really enjoyed the show today, make sure you subscribe, like, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And until next time, see you then.
Thanks for tuning in to AI Marketing Pioneers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Stay tuned for the next episode where we bring you insights from the leading minds in AI marketing.